Welcome, everyone. You're joining today for our mini conference, our virtual mini conference here today. It's May 2nd. My name is Tyler Colbourne. I am the professional development consultant here at the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers, and I'm so grateful you're here. This is a virtual mini conference. We're doing it online this year, and we've been doing lots of work to prepare for this day, and really excited to be able to spend time with other social workers from across the province around this concept of building connections and activating hope. Colin, I just see you raise your hand there. Do you need something? Okay, perfect. Thanks. I was like, people are asking questions already. This is great.
I like to
Uh,
randomly raise my hand. I'll warn you now, but no.
I'll just assume you're raising the roof, perhaps. I don't know if that's the thing that you're compelled to do. But yeah, we're really proud and excited to have folks here. This is a lot of work being done by staff and the PD committee and the subcommittee for the conference. So yeah, we are here for Building Connections, Activating Hope. But I just want to point to this flower graphic here on the right. This is a Mayflower. This design was done by Rebecca Faria, who found this really great graphic, and it's really connected to this idea of building connections and activating hope. And this note at the bottom here says, "We bloom amid the snow," which I think is a great analogy and metaphor for our time here together today. We do have about 169 people who have registered. So we might see, the amount of people here today go up to 100, might see it stay at 52. Really take care of yourselves today and know that the Zoom link that you're using right now is the same Zoom link for the whole day. So if you get disconnected or you need to go away and come back, make sure you use the same Zoom. We're going to get started with a land acknowledgement, and I want to begin by acknowledging that the college here, the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers, is located on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. I'm calling in from our office in Chipuktuk, colonially known as Halifax, but I also feel really privileged to live on the other side of the harbor, Punamukutijik, colonially known as Dartmouth. The inherent rights of the Mi'kmaq were recognized in the peace and friendship treaties signed with the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples from 1725 to 1779. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty to the British Empire, but instead established rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. Canada later reaffirmed the treaties in Section 35 of the Constitution Act of 1982, and they remain active to this day. So let us take time to pause in reflection and gratitude for the land where we live and work. It also can be helpful from a decolonial point of view position to acknowledge that we are expressions of nature. So when we acknowledge the land, we must also begin to acknowledge the wisdom of this planet and align ourselves with its truths. And one of those truths is that we are nature. We are not here to dominate nature. We're not here to have supremacy over nature and Mother Earth. We are entangled with nature. We are expressions of it. This quote at the bottom from Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures, which I'll be referencing throughout today, says, "Understand that the earth is not an extension of our bodies, it's the other way around." So as we acknowledge the land and the people of this land, it's also can be helpful to acknowledge that we are expressions of nature. And so this graphic on the right here highlights that by showing that the fingerprint and a cross section of a tree stump are very similar. And as we acknowledge the land, let us take this moment to pause in gratitude for all who have and continue to heroically care and advocate for this beautiful land. May we join them in this sacred work. Today, I'm thinking about the folks who are doing the Mi'kma'ki Water Walk. One of our registered members, our clinical specialist, Michelle Peters, will be joining Doreen Bernard for the Mi'kma'ki Water Walk. If you're on social media, do look that up. This is one way to support folks in this sacred work. Let us ground ourselves in the wisdom of the land-based Mi'kmaq teachings and values we must all begin to learn. Let us work to decolonize ourselves, our practice, and this community that we share by working for justice for all living beings as an expression of our gratitude for being here. Let us take a deep breath and recenter ourselves away from the violent ways colonization fills our world and fills us. Let us take a deep breath and work on letting go of the unconscious bias that is everywhere, inside and out. May our session today lead us to be in right relationship with this land and with one another. And a reminder as well, in here in Mi'kma'ki, we are all treaty people. How does this impact what we do and how we do it? How will it guide our work together today and going forward? So as we're connecting today around this idea of building connections and activating hope, how is that also entangled with our rights and responsibilities as treaty people? For the college, it's also really important that we're translating the acknowledgement into action. So we're speaking specifically to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to actions, specifically around learning and unlearning, shifts in policy, making sure there's education grounded in Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and resistance and resurgence. And it's important that we're not just using land acknowledgements and words, but we're shifting the material conditions that are connected to settler colonialism so that we can support Indigenous resurgence and rights and resistance. Alongside the land acknowledgement, separate and distinct, however, is our commitment to reparations for people of African descent. I often start these calls by highlighting that the forces of settler colonialism and the forces that led to the forced displacement and enslavement of people of African descent parallel tracks that are sort of entangled. They are interconnected. So as the college, part of the college, reparations for people of African descent are really based on these 5 principles: restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and then guarantees of non-repetition. We are going to share a link to this presentation as well, and I encourage you folks to look at the Emancipation Day reparations link at the bottom. There's lots of links throughout this presentation that will be available to you today, but also in the follow-up email later, and get to know a little bit about this concept of reparations. It's not something that many people are familiar with, and it's something we should be striving to increase and expand within this province. When we're thinking about reparations of people of African descent, we also want to acknowledge the history of people of African descent in Nova Scotia. We have, I believe, 52 distinct communities across this province, and the folks in those communities, it's marked by resilience, contribution, and the profound influence on the province's social fabric. So we're thinking of Black loyalists, the Maroons, to the Southern American Black refugees, and their legacies of these communities, how they've indelibly shaped Nova Scotia's cultural landscape. Their stories marked by perseverance in the face of adversity are central to our shared history and necessitate both recognition and restitution. So in committing to these principles of reparations, the college aims to honor the significant contributions of people of African descent and African Nova Scotians and ensure a future where equity, justice, and respect for human rights are not just ideals, but realities for all. And so again, it's about shifting the material conditions. And so acknowledging the past, acknowledging the present, but also ensuring that as we move towards a more socially just and harmonious world in the future, we're preventing the harms of the past to be carried forward. We also commit within our professional development, so the professional development program, our PD standards, and the activities that we deliver, we're committing to making sure that we're resisting neutrality and this concept of neutrality. Recently, I saw a post from the Canadian Association of Social Workers that acknowledged different points of views within the federal election and encouraging people to vote. And I saw a comment below it that said, "I don't think that social workers should be political." And I just want to acknowledge that social work is inherently political. And for us to be striving for social justice, to be striving for decolonization, we absolutely have to be taking a position. So this quote from Elie Wiesel says, "We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented." So I want you to think a little bit about how does today's session, this mini conference on building connections and activating hope, how does it move us towards justice? How does your participation today contribute to critical hope? And how might it contribute to liberation? See lots of folks checking in the chat. Thank you so much for doing that. I really appreciate it. So again, in the check-in the chat, Nair and Rebecca had just posted in these prompts, but we'd love to know who you are. Or who are you? Another way of saying that. And how are you arriving? When we say how are you arriving, it's not did you take the bus? It's how are you feeling right now in this moment? What's on your heart, mind, body, and spirit as we start this time together? Where are you calling in from? What land are you on? Try to engage with this link, placenames.mapdev.ca, to see if you can find the Mi'kmaq name for the land that you're on. And then what are you looking forward to in today's mini conference? We are building this mini conference in response to feedback from members that have said that we want to be able to activate hope in ourselves and others, but we also want to build connections and spend time with our peers and our colleagues. So what are you looking forward to today? Our agenda today, so we're going to do welcome and framing. Myself and Bria Symonds, our associate registrar, will be doing open remarks. We also have a panel discussion, so we'll be doing a building connections and activating hope panel discussion with five amazing panelists. We're also trying to build some spaciousness today, knowing that many of you are probably working on the side of your desk while also being here present. So we have a break from 11:45 to 12. We have a virtual mingle at lunch that is meant to sort of replicate or invite folks into a space that is similar to what you'd be doing at a conference in person. You'd be sitting down with people at lunch and talking about things. So we're going to try that out. And in the afternoon, we're going to do an interactive session that has a bit of a design challenge. How do we as social workers activate hope and collectively create change? So we'll play around with a whiteboard technology using Canva and try some things out together. At the end of the day, we're going to be sharing some advocacy resources and talking a little bit about our social policy framework. And then we'll have closing remarks and a wrap up. Again, reminder, it's the same Zoom link for the whole day. Please don't share the Zoom link with anyone. That'd be really helpful. And then most of today's session is being recorded, except for the breakout rooms. So if you're someone who doesn't want to be on camera and later on in the day, I would invite you to turn off your camera so that you're not recorded. For the first part of the day, you don't have access to your share screen or your mic or your video. But this afternoon you will. So if you don't want to be on the recording, just make sure you keep your camera off. As well, if you leave and come back, or if you experience any challenges, you can reach out to Paulina, who's here as a support person, and her email is paulina.reiss@nscsw.org. So some framing for our time together. This is from the Broccoli Seed Agreements from Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures. And offer these as a way to challenge consumer mindset and the ways that settler colonialism and white supremacy can sometimes reinforce this idea that our expectations will neatly and exactly line up with what we experience. So just want to acknowledge that your engagement with the session may not have immediate and or practical applications for you, and that's okay. You don't have to agree with anything presented or shared, but ask you to be open to seeing what happens. Take responsibility for yourself by observing and learning from your conscious and unconscious responses. It's up to you to decide how much you want to share and participate. And then finally, we can all engage in ways that support others. So we're social workers, we're grounded in our values and ethics. We're here because we want to build connections and create hope for ourselves and for others. And it's meant to be, it's a formal session. We have some content that we're sharing, panel discussion, but it's also meant to be a relational space. And so do your best to take care of yourselves and engage with others in the way that feels right for you. Hopefully you're comfy. If you need to get up and go to the washroom or do anything else or respond to a work thing, do what's best for you. No judgment, no shame. Take care of yourselves and send us a message if you need. Seeing lots of folks joining in from all across the province, which is really awesome. Thanks for engaging with the check-in questions. Of course, this is a professional development opportunity. So for members of the college, which you all are, make sure you track this for your PD. So this would be considered formal learning, formal professional development. You can also use the registration confirmation email or your PDF ticket as a verification document when you're doing your annual renewals. You also might be able to follow up with this session and take some action around social justice and advocacy, and that would align with one of our mandated topics around social justice. So our objectives today really is about building knowledge. So we want to be able to identify and understand strategies and approaches to cultivating relationships, activating hope, and how we might address the complex issues of our times for ourselves and for other social workers. We want to be able to identify and understand intersectional and socially just approaches to activating hope in social work practice. Hoping we can develop some skills and implement self-reflective processes that support ethical social work practice and advocacy, hoping that we can examine and shift beliefs, worldviews, values and ideologies that contribute to our hope and our community building. And then finally, we have a relational objective. We hope that you connect with others and build relationships and support professional social work identity and practice. One of the other ones that's not really here, but I think is implicit to all of the activities is I hope it's a little bit of fun. I hope there are moments that you laugh or connect with other people and just enjoy yourselves if you can. Of course, our sessions are grounded in the Code of Ethics, like I said earlier. And just as a light refresher for the Code of Ethics, this is from the CASW Code of Ethics. Value 1, respecting the dignity and worth of all people. 2, promoting social justice. 3, pursuing truth and reconciliation. 4, valuing human relationships. 5, preserving integrity and professional practice. 6, maintaining privacy and confidentiality. And then 7, providing competent professional services. So we're here to learn, but we're also here to uphold these code of ethics. I'm also really proud to say that the NSCSW's Code of Ethics have been finalized mostly and approved by Council. So in the coming months, you'll see our adapted and revised version based off the Canadian Association. We have adapted and revised it based on feedback and consultation with many of our members over a period of like a year and a half. So look out for those. I also want to acknowledge the work of staff and the PD committee who made this possible. We co-created this session together. So with us today on this call, we have many of our PD members, and I just want to acknowledge that some of them are on the panel discussion, some of them have support roles, but they're also going to engage as participants in the session, especially in the afternoon. We have Helen Ludy, Rose Scott Lindcourt, Leslie Finch, Joanne Sulman, Lindsay Murphy, Kamala Williams, Aisha Ali, Marie Westhaver. Marie can't be here today, unfortunately. Holly Johnson and Mario Swiler. And I'm really grateful to be able to work with these fabulous folks in the committee and the subcommittee, and we're doing some cool things. Some support roles that I want to acknowledge. We are joined by Lindsay Murphy, who's part of our PD committee, and she's offered to be an Affirming Spaces and active listener. And so throughout the sessions today, it could be possible that maybe you might feel activated or dysregulated or potentially triggered by conversations with other people or the content that's being shared. As humans who are living through complex times, that's possible. So if you feel like you could benefit from a short one-on-one with Lindsay just to sort of process, make sense of what you're feeling and experiencing, or you just need to be heard, message Lindsay privately using the chat function, and she'll send you a link to another Zoom or another resource to have a short one-on-one. If Lindsay's unavailable, or if you prefer to go to someone else, reach out to your own network. I know I have people in my life that when things happen that I reach out to. I have like a close group of friends and we all support each other as peers and colleagues. So that feels better for you, please do that as well. In the morning, monitoring the chat, Helen's going to be helping us out just in case I miss anything. I'm going to be here to facilitate and moderate the discussions. So I might miss things, but Helen will be monitoring the chat and give me a little nudge if I forget something. In the afternoon, Aisha is going to do. If you experience any tech support or troubleshooting issues, message Rebecca, who's here on the call. She's doing all the chat functions and breakout rooms, so you can give her a message if you're experiencing any challenges there. You can also message Paulina by email if anything happens, if you're not, not able to access the Zoom link or anything like that. And then in the small group discussions, just a reminder again, the PD committee as well. So if you're curious about the work that we're doing as a PD committee or the professional development program, feel free to ask them questions as well. Not to put them on the spot. And with that, that is the welcome and framing. I am going to pass it over to our fabulous Associate Registrar, Bria, who's going to start us off with opening remarks. And Bria, if you just want to give me a little nudge when you want the screen to be moved along, that'd be awesome.
Okay, great. Are you able to hear me good? Amazing. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is my first official mini conference in my role, but I've attended many of these in my past for professional development and just to engage with other social workers. We're really delighted to have you all here today. Like Tyler was mentioning, the overview, today's theme is critical hope, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of great conversations and just a lot of opportunity for connections. Tyler, you can hit the next slide for me. Thank you. It's really interesting because when I was talking to Tyler last week and I was like, the mini conference is coming up and I see the theme is critical hope. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to talk about. And the reason being at that time is I found myself in deep reflection over the last week about when was the last time I thought about critical hope in my work. And this meaning sometimes when we're so laser focused on our assignments or our clients, the folks that we work with, the services that we do, we're just so deep entrenched in it that sometimes we forget to pop our head up and say, oh, right, there are moments of that went really good and that made me really hopeful. So I thought about how to approach this conversation today and what are some things that are keeping me grounded in this work and keep me hopeful in everything that I do. So for me, I thought of critical hope being a framework that is often used in social work, but also in many social settings that combines critical analysis with hope while acknowledging both the realities of systemic injustice and the possibility of a better future and what that could look like. At the core, it does use intersectionality as a way of viewing and acting in the world while holding a conscious awareness of historical, social, and cultural context, while maintaining a belief that there is an opportunity for positivity in the future and change and liberation. You can go to the next slide for me, Tyler. Thank you. And I love that when I was having these conversations with Tyler and just other colleagues and folks around me, I was like, I love that we're using intersectionality. For myself, intersectionality is it's a theory, but yet a practice that I've incorporated in majority of my social work degree and profession for many years now. When I've come to find intersectionality, I came to find it in my undergrad when I found myself as a student, a racialized student in a class in a discipline of study that did not include Black women at the time. And I had to advocate for myself and say, hey, I know that my experience is very much valid. I know thousands and hundreds of other Black women, Black femmes that feel this and are not seeing themselves in this work. So what does that look like? And that's when I started to have advocacy conversations with my professors, with my institution about our story should be shared and be valid and be in these spaces. And that's when I came to find Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw's work in intersectionality. And I don't know about anybody else on the call, but sometimes when I'm reading something or if I find a new approach, a new tool, a new theory, a new realm of research, and it kind of gives me that validation of, oh, yes, this does exist and someone else is also experiencing it. It gives me that feeling of connection, even if they're across the globe somewhere else doing the important work, it makes me feel seen and heard. So when I found this work, I just deeply entrenched myself in it. I framed a lot of my work around intersectionality, around critical race theory, around anti-Black racism, around the over-policing of Black and Indigenous bodies and what that looks like for folks in that population. Because what we do know is in a systematic level, these stories are often portrayed in a negative light. But in a community level, in an interconnected level, we know that there is positivity, there is change, there is community, and there is connectedness in this work. And I feel like when we're talking about critical hope and we're using the term, the approach, the theory of intersectionality, we have to look at all things that contribute to a situation, a population, and people, and what that means for them. Next slide, Tyler. Thank you. So when I'm approaching this work, I did pull into a lot of the knowledge that I have been receiving from a lot of my professors, folks in community, colleagues that I work with. Someone I consider as a mentor is Dr. Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard. And a lot of times she will bring out her 4A approaches. And I thought about in deep reflection, when I'm thinking about critical hope, what does that look like for me? And I found myself finding the 4A approach. So today for the 4A approach, I'm going to be talking about advocacy, awareness, accountability, and action. So when deep diving in critical hope, sometimes we look at advocacy. Like, who are we advocating for and what are we advocating for? And I always say to folks, does your advocacy include accessibility? A lot of times we like to say to folks, I'm advocating for this person, I'm advocating for this client. And when we have these conversations, I realize their advocacy does not include accessibility. It doesn't look at their location, it doesn't look at if they have the proper tools, resources, or things to even engage in these conversations. And if we're going to be doing advocacy work or breaking away from certain barriers, we have to look at all things in terms of accessibility and what our populations, our clients, our colleagues, or yourself and what we need. So I like to bring in that accessibility piece into my advocacy and in alignment with critical hope. Because I do believe if we're looking at better futures and having this, optimism feeling of things will get better, we also have to look at accessibility in this conversation as well. I believe in awareness. What is showing up for you in your new learnings? I know professional development is something that all social workers are always engaging in or should be engaging in, I should say. And sometimes we actually do learn new learnings. For some folks, it is refreshers going through certain topics and saying, yes, I know this, I've been doing this for many moons. And although we have, sometimes we actually learn new learnings. And then do we sit with that? What does that mean for us? How is that new learning showing up for us in this work right now? And what does that mean for my overall objective of hope in my work, and intersectionality in my work? And what does that mean for me and how I'm going to now implement it into my work? And then how is new awareness making you feel in terms of present structures, systems, what's relevant in our current society today? I like to call myself a still younger social worker. And the reason being is because I talk to a lot of folks that have been in this profession for a very long time, that are full of wisdom and knowledge and very much well seasoned in their professions. But when we get together, we have conversations about, we both learn from each other because I'm bringing what they like to consider that fresh new perspective, but I'm also gaining a lot of that wisdom. And then in those conversations, we find connection in how it makes us feel hopeful in this work. You can hit the next slide for me, Tyler. Thank you. The next A that I like to do deep reflecting in this work is accountability. And I always say to folks when I'm having conversations about accountability, like how are they feeling when one, they're either holding themselves accountable or holding other people accountable. I know a lot of times accountability sometimes feels like you're in trouble or there's going to be punishment or it's the end of the spectrum of this is going to be so bad, there's going to be discipline here. But I like to approach accountability from a place of a learning experience. What can I do better next time? And what did I not know? What were the areas that I may have made a mistake unintentionally? And how can I become better in this work? And I think when you keep yourself open, I think accountability should be associated with grace and understanding that we all are human at the end of the day. I know that we live in a world where technology and AIs and different robots and things are out there doing a lot of work, but at the end of the day, we are humans, and humans are certainly flawed. And if our intentions are always pure with good intentions, and we do make a mistake, that's where we can have that conversation of grace and being present in that work. So I like to approach accountability with holding others with accountability, with the understanding that they generally may not know what has happened, but here's the understanding. And now we can then bring resources and support to help them understand and help them process this new information and or holding structures accountable. A lot of times we work in places that just have very much outdated structures, systems, and policies that do not work for our relevant society. Advocacy then looks like doesn't work for my community. This doesn't work for my clients. This doesn't work for me, and I feel actually very much harmed in this space. And it's those loud conversations, but also those little conversations that we have that not only do we hold ourselves accountable to what we need personally as social workers in our profession, but the greater good of helping our clients, populations, individuals in this work. So I say all that to say, with your accountability, have some grace in there and knowing that it's always to be working to the better good. And then the last action, or the last A, I should say, is action. I've had many conversations with folks when they talk about activism and, being on the front line and doing what we consider the hard work. And I think social work in general, it is a very difficult profession, but it's also a helping profession. On one hand, we are always helping people, but we also are in these times where we're having really difficult conversations or we're in situations that are in very difficult situations, but at the core of it, it's always to be helping others and helping communities or helping structures or define what the helping needs to be happening in our areas. So I think action, it can be measured in different ways. And the way that I say to folks, how are you measuring your action? Because some folks feel like they're not doing enough. But when I check in with them, I'm like, you're doing a lot actually. Like you're having those, like I said, those deep conversations, you're advocating for yourself. Maybe you're overlooking things that probably weren't researched or overlooked before in your professions. Maybe you're sending emails, maybe you're joining committees, maybe you're having like kitchen table talks or just engaging with other colleagues from the past that you haven't seen to have these conversations about this is how I'm feeling in this work. What does this mean for me? Sometimes actions simply start by just a conversation. It can be that coffee with a colleague and catching up on your case notes or your clients or just how you're feeling about the world in general. I know some of our social workers and our members are social work candidates. And I know, I'm sure Tyler can resonate with this as well, is a lot of times when we have conversations with folks that are social work candidates, it's how are they currently feeling of being new social workers. And as folks that are seasonal social workers or have been in this work for many years, a lot of times when we have these conversations, they feel when they're a new social worker, they're not doing enough and they're trying to find their way in this work. But I think we always like to provide that idea of hope that things will get better and you will find your balance that works well for you. And I think that's really important when we're having these conversations about critical hope. I always enjoy talking to new social workers, folks that are really excited about the field, because I remember what it feels like when you're gaining your social work education and you're truly excited to become a social worker. And then you get into the field and then you go through different career changes, you go through different impacts. And then sometimes, like I said, you feel kind of like boggled about everything that's happening to you that we kind of lose um, sight of the hope that we once carried or that excitement for the profession. Whereas other people have always been excited and exude that excitement all the time. And I always try to be like them in this work because I'm like, I wonder what their self-care routine looks like. What are they doing? But the reason why I feel so motivated and inspired by them because I feel like they've never lost their hope in this work. And I'm hoping that we can always work towards having some idea of optimism and hope, even in the difficult times, because I feel social workers are doing the important work right now to always improve and impact future generations. Even if we don't see it today, our tomorrow should be, we hope our tomorrow will reflect the work that we're doing right now. So that's kind of how I approached this work for today. I want to thank you all for joining us today. If you're here for the morning, if you're here for the afternoon, like Tyler mentioned, get everything that you need, get your coffees, get your teas, take your breaks, reflect, take some time for yourself. However this is showing up for you, let it sit, let it resonate, and just let it be what it's meant to be. But thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Bria. I just did a react on the react function, and if folks want to do that, there's a react function there where you can celebrate whatever, but I pressed the heart one and it just set up all these heart bubbles behind me. So Bria loved it. But I love working with Bria, and thank you so much for offering your insights to how we approach critical hope. Building off of Bria's comments, I'm going to continue. And oh, did you want to do this quote, Bria?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I was just, I think,
Sorry.
in fact, I even forget sometimes what I do over here. I think it connects back to the connection piece, and the fundamental human piece is, sometimes when we're in this work, we kind of feel isolated or alone. But then I remind myself when I'm talking to other members, I'm like, oh, right, there's also thousands of other social workers that are probably feeling the way that I'm feeling right now. And I think connection is a critical piece in this work. I don't think that you should be doing any major movement, shifts, actionable things alone. I think that it's better when you do have folks around you and that you do have the supports that you need. So in this critical hope theme and notion, find your community, find your people, because you're going to need it.
Thanks, Bria. I just want to acknowledge that working with Bria and the team here at the college gives me a lot of hope. So grateful for that. Building off of what Bria was talking about and to further frame up the discussions for the rest of the day, I'm going to share some things that I think are important to hold on to in this conversation. First, I want to start by this definition of critical hope, and this is from Race and Wellbeing, The Lives, Hopes, and Activism of African Canadians by James Estey, Thomas Bernard, Benjamin Lloyd, and Turner. This is referenced at the end of the presentation, so if this is a book that you're curious about, please check it out. They write, critical hope refers to a hopeful action that is based on the critical analysis of a situation and the recognition that wishing alone is not sufficient to make change. It involves an understanding of the forces that produce injustice and an imagining of what the world without those forces and without the injustice might look like. So tapping into this idea of if there were less barriers, if we had practices in spaces and community grounded in liberation, what might that look like? How can we activate critical hope while understanding the suffering and the hardness and the oppression of the now? So critical hope and intersectionality are entangled. And so Crenshaw, as we referenced earlier, she writes, intersectionality is a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects. And one of the things I often see folks use this lens of intersectionality is to sort of define who is more oppressed or who is less oppressed. And the reminder here is that it's not about seeing more or less, it's about seeing the interlocking systems of power and experiences of privilege. So intersectionality is an analysis so that we can see how power and privilege show up in our work and in our communities and our relationships. And so how can we sustain hope while applying an intersectional lens? What is possible when we see liberation and critical hope is entangled? And so in the next few slides, I'm going to share some resources from Decolonial Futures And they're a bit provocative, I would say, but I want to contextualize them a little bit for our conversation today. But this is from a deck of cards called the Radical Tenderness cards and the Without Modernity cards, which I love and use all the time from Decolonial Futures, and wanted to offer some for the framing. And the first one says, how can we face the end of the world with or without despair? And this is not about the end of the world like in the movie 2012 or, I don't know, The Walking Dead. It's not about the apocalypse and the grand sort of end of the world that's presented in TV and media, which is so fun to consume. I love those stories. But this is more about hopefully the end of supremacy and dominance and the end of oppressive ways of knowing and being. And so there's a bit of a paradox here between hope and despair. And I often joke with folks, and some of you might have heard this before. I've had existential despair my whole entire life. I think it's like a core value of mine. I remember being a little kid, probably like 6 or 7 years old, and was on the playground down in Middleton in Nova Scotia, where I grew up. And other kids were like, "You want to play Pogs?" And I'd be like, "Have you heard of bird flu?" So I was not very popular, but I had a lot of existential despair. And that's something that carries with me into today. And, we're facing challenges today that are so complex and so hard, and suffering is present here in our communities, here in our relationships. There might be people on this call who are dealing with really hard stuff. We're tapped into the news about suffering all throughout the world. And so we have to sit in this sort of messy, complicated, complex space of holding the paradox of hope and also despair. So as we see the rise of fascism and authoritarianism and then the forces of domination seemingly expand, how do we hospice and compost these oppressive ways of knowing and being? And this is referencing Vanessa Andreotti from her book, Hospicing Modernity. And so is there a way that we can do it without despair? Is there a way that we can do it with a bit of sense of critical hope? The next card says, what can activate a sense of care and responsibility towards everything that overrides indifference, self-interest, and categories of thought? Pardon me. So as a way to consider how to move forward, how do we do it with respect for how entangled we all are? How do we do it in a way that allows us to see us as expressions of the land? How can we apply critical hope for all living beings and systems while balancing our own desires and fears? Because those are also, we're seeing a rise of applications from people from the United States, specifically a lot of queer social workers who want to relocate to Canada because of potentially less oppression and anti-queer, anti-2S LGBTQS, TQI plus hate. And so how do we do this while balancing our own desires and fears and recognizing that some people can't move, some people can't escape the conditions that they're in? How can being overwhelmed and disillusioned be productive? And this isn't productive in the sense of capitalism. Your value is intrinsically, you're worthwhile, even outside of the capitalistic mindset of productivity. But how can being overwhelmed and disillusioned be productive? How might it be possible for us to move toward, with respect for the complexity of the now, with critical hope and critical connections, while also feeling overwhelmed and disillusioned? For many of the folks on this call today and many of the social workers we work with, many of us have experienced burnout. So how do we sit with that while also trying to move forward? And it's a reminder that many of us got into this work because we believed a better world was possible for us and for others. So how do we also tap into that energy that we had when we became social workers? This last one is, how can we hospice the dying way of knowing and being and assist with the birth of something new, still fragile, undefined, and potentially, but not necessarily wiser? So as we have this critical hope for more just and harmonious worlds beyond the limits of dominant systems and ways of knowing and being, how do we apply the critical hope, even if what we are working towards is unknowable? We can't use the tools and the challenges of today to recreate a world that is more just and harmonious. What happens if we leave some of these things behind? How do we move forward when we see ourselves as social workers as agents for liberation? Is there a way that we can do it with a bit of whimsy and joy? And as referencing Cindy Blackstock here, how do we do it with a sense of moral courage? I also think it's really important to, speak to the entanglement of our professional identities and our personal values. Sometimes in this work, I believe that it can be trickier to disentangle them because our work is grounded in values. Who we are as social workers is often tied to who we want or how we want to be in our personal relationships and how we want to move forward to a better world. And so we are people who work in principled ways. We're tied to our values. We apply them in our personal, political, and professional realms, and we seek to transform across the micro, meso, macro, and the meta fields. And I just think it's really important that social workers can be architects of critical hope. It's something that we can be doing together, not just for ourselves, but for community, for liberation, for the world. So as we're here today, I want to just offer an invitation and a reminder. So the conference today invites you to meet and reflect on the person you were when you first thought, I want to be a social worker. And thinking back to the time that you applied to the School of Social Work, when you thought, maybe this is a career for me. What was the energy and the hopes and ideals that you had? And can you connect back to that person and share in the joy, hardships, and progress you've experienced since that time? Consider how you can co-create a sense of critical hope with yourselves and others present here today. And a reminder that throughout this province, we have thousands of social workers who every single day choose to have hope in the face of oppression, in the face of complexity, in the face of despair. You're here today because this concept, this idea resonated with you. One thing I just noticed as well, my camera sometimes zooms in my face. It's very dramatic. It's one of those ones that has AI built in. It's not for dramatic effect. I do it because I gesture a lot. So if it zooms in, apologies. I'm not doing it for dramatic effect, I promise. Although that does sound kind of fun. So we're going to transition over to our panel discussion. That'll be the part of the morning. So we're going to go to about 11:45, and we have 5 amazing registered social workers here with us today. Well, some registered social workers, candidates, associate members, clinical specialists as well, and a student member. I'm really grateful that they're sharing their expertise and their wisdom. And we know that for our members, it's important that we hear from other members. We have so much expertise in this profession and in this province. And so we're hearing from 5 people who are living and breathing social work in various capacities in this province. And I'm grateful that they're here today. So joining us today, we have Rose Scott Lindcourt, who is recently retired and is an associate member, comes from the School of Social Work, and also is part of the PD committee. We have Aisha Ali, who's a registered social worker, just recently registered, doing some clinical work, I believe. We have Colin James Morrison, who's a relatively new registered social work clinical specialist. We have Kendall Paul, who's a social work candidate doing some really amazing work at the McBuy Native Friendship Center. And then we have Hannah Long, who's a student, but also a social work candidate. So these 5 folks are going to be joining us and speaking to some questions around this idea of critical hope and building connections, and sharing their own wisdom and insights and experiences and what's real for them. I'm not going to introduce them individually, but our first question is going to offer them a chance to introduce themselves. For the process of our panel discussion, I will be identifying who will speak in what order. Also encourage folks to ask questions in the chat. I can't guarantee that we'll all get to all the questions or that we'll have time for them, but please do ask questions in the chat and we'll do our best. I'm just going to check in for our screen here. Rebecca, are we set up to have everyone pinned for the panel discussion?
They are all pinned now.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much. And just make sure all of our panelists. Yeah, I see Kendall, Rose, Hannah, Aisha, and Colin. Awesome. Here, well, let's just set the screen up properly. So I'm going to be moderating the discussion. There are 3 rounds of questions. Each panelist will be invited to respond to the question individually, and we'll go in order. I'm also going to try and hold space at the end of the question round to see if any of our panelists have any other additional insights or things that they want to share. And again, a reminder, if you have questions, please ask them in the chat box and we'll do our best to respond to them. And to the panelists too, if you're monitoring the chat box and one of those questions feels really alive for you, feel free to respond to it when it's your turn to speak. So the questions we're going to be exploring today, question 1 is, who are you? How are you arriving? And what is on your heart, minds, and spirit as we begin this call? So inviting the panelists to share whatever is real for them. What communities they're from, who's with them today, how did they become a social worker, anything at all that feels important to share as we start our time together. Question 2 is, the world is a complex place and many social workers are feeling the weight of existential issues. Given this, what does this year's theme of building connections and activating hope mean for you? What is the role of social workers in building connections and activating critical hope in others? And then finally, question 3, what is your vision for a more just and harmonious world? How do we make it a reality? Anything else you would like to share? So we're going to get started with question 1. And Aisha, I was hoping you would go first, if that's okay.
Oh, no. After all these years, I'm still struggling to kind of work with the technology here, but
100%. Thank you.
yeah. So hello, everyone, and good morning. Thank you for having me. So like Tyler said, my name is Aisha Ali, and I am a registered social worker. I'm a first generation child of immigrants and a practicing Muslim. I'm currently working in private practice, and my goal in my private practice is to provide culturally and religiously responsive care to my clients and advocate for sustained changes across the services that our clients use. I am arriving today with an overall sense of gratitude and with my spirit feeling light as I'm excited to be in this virtual space with my friends, peers, and colleagues. On the other hand, my heart does arrive with a bit of heaviness for the state of the world, which makes this discussion about critical hope even more meaningful to me. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing from my fellow panelists as well as learning from folks throughout today's activities.
Thank you, Aisha. I so appreciate you honoring the many ways in which you're showing up today. So thank you for doing that. I also just want to put a plug in that Aisha is so fun to work with, and I'm really grateful that you're part of the PD committee. Continuing on with the PD committee energy and someone else I also love working with, Rose, we're going to go to you next. So how are you arriving? What is on your heart, mind, and spirit as we begin this call?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? I was playing around with my settings. So like
Yeah.
Aisha, it's been a few years, but we're still kind of tinkering with things. Um, my name is Rose Scott Lincourt. I've met some of you. I know I have. I recognize the names. I'm now retired after 40 years in the working world. So yeah, I look much younger than I am. Um, Come on, people. I identify as a spouse, a mom, a daughter, a friend, a dog mom, among other relational descriptors. I'm cisgendered, white settler of Irish English descent by way of Newfoundland. Um, I grew up as a third culture kid. That might be a new term for some of you. A TCK, which really shaped me as a person, as a social worker. A TCK is a child who grows up in a culture that is not their own as part of another culture, which is also embedded in that culture. So I was a military kid of Newfoundland parents. I spent 8 years growing up in Belgium as part of a military community, but I was also part of a bigger cultural community and identified quite as Belgian for quite some time as a child. So anyway, it really shaped me. My background for the last 40 plus years, crisis intervention, not-for-profits, community services, community health, worked in healthcare for 10 years. And the last 10 years of my career, I was at Dalhousie. I arrived today feeling quite happy, feeling well, a little nervous. I think that's probably a good thing, as well as, dare I say, hopeful. I think, when I was listening to Bria's presentation and even Tyler's presentation, I was like, okay, those are things that I was going to say too. So that's a good thing. So it's, I think I felt quite relieved that I was hearing things that I believe to be true. So I'm really grateful to have been asked to be part of this panel. I look forward to hearing from others as well and hearing from you as participants. Because really these discussions and other social workers has always been my point of refuge as a social worker. It's like going home to my people. So that's how I feel about the profession. So I'll leave it at that. If that's enough, Tyler, I think it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm sorry for stealing some of your thoughts and concepts. That just means we're aligned, which is nice. Not just in the military growing up and also the family connections to Ireland and Newfoundland. We also share that. But yeah, thank you so much, Rose, for checking in so authentically and sharing how you're arriving. And I also want to say, like, I'm nervous too, having 86 people, on a call, and a thing that's, 5 hours long virtually brings up some nervous energy for me. So I'm grateful that other people may be feeling that as well. We're going to pass it over to Hannah, if you can go next. So how are you doing? How are you arriving? Who are you? What do you want to share? And what is on your heart, mind, and spirit as we begin this call?
Great. Hi, guys. I am arriving a little bit ill. You might be able to notice that in my voice. So this gruffness, it's not just a mystique. It is, in fact, a bit of an illness. So a little exhausted, a little tired for me today. I am located here in Mi'kma'ki and specifically Timberley right now in my home. I am a mother to a little one who may have brought home this sickness from daycare. And I am a spouse, a friend. I'm a white settler here. I identify as being cisgendered. And I am a student presently in my master's. So I'm doing that through the University of Waterloo part-time while working full-time. And currently I'm in my placement. So it's quite busy for me right now. I've been a social worker for about 6 years now. Did my BSW at Dow. And so on my heart is a little mix, similar to a lot of others, of hope and heaviness. Hope, of course, because that's what keeps us all moving forward, and being in this sort of a collective is really where those things grow. But then also this heaviness because there are just so many issues and challenges facing us in the world right now that are deeply real and impact so many lives. So holding space for that as well. On my mind, really, as I hear folks speak, is just the sense of interconnectedness in our struggles a lot of the time, and how deeply interconnected our struggles are, and what that means to build sort of collective responsiveness, and really how that like lends into the intersectionality that Bria had been talking about, and building bridges between people when we're so polarized, right? And if we can understand that interconnectedness between us, what possibilities that could bring. And then on my spirit is just a bit of tenderness today, recognition that a lot of us carry grief or illness or hard things on our minds and hearts that all deserve care, and thinking and appreciating that.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And I'm just laughing at that line. It's not just mystique. That's really clever and fun. But also kudos to you for bouncing so much and arriving here even with like a bit of a tickle in the throat, and but also doing school, having done there's the I'm zooming in again. Having just finished my master's last year. It's so much work. So kudos. We're gonna pass it over to Kendall. How are you arriving? What do you want to share about yourself, and what's on your heart, mind, and spirit as we begin this call?
Hey, Gwen and Telewizi Kendall Paul, Wajia member to Unamagi. I was always taught by an elder in my life to introduce myself first in my language. I am not a fluent speaker, but I am learning. So hi, my name is Kendall Paul. I am Mi'kmaq from Member 2 First Nation in Cape Breton. My pronouns are they, them, or negum in my language. I'm bisexual, two-spirit, non-binary. All these identities are very important to me and shape how I show up in the world, how I practice in social work. So as Tyler mentioned, I've been working at the Mi'kmaq Native French Center here in Juvuktuk, what's colonial known as Halifax, for 3 years now. I was a housing intensive case manager, which was my first social work job out of my BSW, which was very much thrown in the deep end. Working with folks, I was working with high acuity urban Indigenous clients who were either unhoused or at risk of being unhoused, housing insecure. So yeah, I worked there for about 1.5 years, and then I went back to do my master's, and then I came back to the French Center as I'm currently their mental health counselor, one of 2 mental health counselors on the mental health and wellness team. So that has been really rewarding, really stressful work, but very it's been good overall. And I also an intergenerational survivor of colonial violence, the residential schools and day school system. And also, I always remember when I first wanted to be a social worker, I was probably like 12 or 13. I was watching Charmed And she, one of the characters is a social worker, and I was like, oh, like that's like helping people. I want to do that. And I had mentioned it. I was watching with my mom, and my mom's immediate reaction was like, oh, you want to take our kids away? Because like she, in fact, was raised in an orphanage. She is like a 60s scoop survivor. So she was very like, why would you want to do that? And like since then I was like, okay, well, I want to do this, but I've always been very not like never wanted to work in child welfare, which was kind of why right after post COVID, like that was the only place that would really take you. That is not, which is kind of wild. That's like that child welfare and being in such a sensitive position is the one place where they will take you without previous experience. And also like it's such a delicate work. And I feel like it uh, demands and deserves more experienced workers, or at least like more education in like how to interact with especially like BIPOC communities. But I'm feeling grateful. I'm grateful to be invited onto this panel. Thank you, Tyler. I really appreciate working with you. It's been very fun. And yeah, I feel like I am grateful to be here. I'm feeling a little nervous, which is probably why I'm rambling a little bit, but that is actually, this is my space to ramble, so that's fine. But yeah, I think that is all I wanted to share.
Thanks, Kendall. And as you know, also, I totally love working with you as well. But yeah, this is your space to ramble, and I am so good at it, rambling. So let's ramble together. But thank you for checking in and sharing how you're feeling and expressing what's going on for you right now. And also just want to acknowledge how busy Kendall is. I think every time we're talking, I'm always amazed by how much you have on the go. So thanks for making time for being here today. And then we're going to wrap up this question round with Colin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Colin. Pronouns are he, him. I've worked in mental health for nearly 30 years now. So like Rose, a child prodigy when I started. And over 20 of those have been at the IWK, and the last 10 as a social worker. I started out as a youth care worker in intensive services, and now I serve as a clinician, a trauma-informed care consultant, and most recently, a clinical specialist. I teach part-time at Dalhousie, and I'm returning to Dal this fall as a student, where I'm going to pursue a PhD in health because clearly I miss last-minute paper deadlines and student debt. I grew up in Whitney Pier, which is in Cape Breton. It's a small working class community, a very diverse community. And I think that has really helped shape my lens and how I see people, how I see power, and how I see responsibility and possibility move in the world. I'm a queer man and a proud member of the two-spirited LGBTQIA plus community. And that's certainly identity that has shaped how I move through the world. So it's been a source of strength and empowerment at times, and then other times it's been deeply challenging. And I think as a queer male, it's really taught me a lot about the power of community and chosen family. It's taught me about the weight of being visible and the courage sometimes that it takes to be yourself in systems that aren't really built for you. I'm really passionate about trauma work. I'm passionate about men's mental health and queer affirming care. And the research that I'm involved in now kind of links all three of those things. Humor is a big part of how I connect with the world, if you can't tell. So not to avoid the hard stuff, but I think just to make the hard stuff more bearable. And I'm arriving today with a mix of joy and hope to be in such wonderful company, concern, and I think responsibility. So just reflecting on these questions made me think about, the families and the young people that I've worked with, that work in systems that really haven't caught up to, where they are and what it is that they need. I'm holding real concern about the political realities of today, and particularly the rising threat to the queer community and other marginalized communities. And I think for me, just being here in this space is sort of holding concern and determination at the same time, sprinkled with a little bit of humor, and still choosing to show up even when things feel really uncertain.
Thanks for that, Colin. And I can share with you in that appreciation and desire to have humor be part of this practice and work as well. It's something that's really central to who I am. Sometimes I like to make too many jokes, but here I am. I wanted to just offer to all the panelists that if there's something you feel like, oh, I wish I had said that to introduce myself more, please do it in the next round, and feel free to share anything else that, about your identities or community or people that are, have helped you become who you are. But thank you so much for sharing and showing up so authentically. I want to share back a little bit of what I heard in that intro round, and firstly, a sense of heaviness. Also that people were showing up wholly and authentically, but recognition of complexity, hope, and how important it is to connect with other social workers and driving forward that identity and that hope. Some of us are showing up a little ill. Some of us are carrying, our ancestors with us in acknowledgement of different generations. And some of the panelists are carrying for different identities, a mix of hope and heaviness, and also a strong appreciation for our interconnectedness and entanglement. Also acknowledgement of the harms of the social work practice and profession in the past, but also the present, and the potential for being and doing better and doing more. Importance of humor, and then overall responsibilities, feelings of responsibilities for service users, families, community, and the larger. So thank you so much, folks, for checking in and telling us how you're arriving. We are going to move on to the second question. And this is a juicy, meaty question. So approach it however you would like. We'll make some space at the end of this round to see if there's anything else people want to share. But really, this question is, the world is a complex place, and many social workers are feeling the weight of existential issues. So given this weight of existential issues and heaviness that was named in the first round, what does this year's theme of building connections and activating hope mean for you personally? And then following up with that, what is the role of social workers in building connections and activating critical hope in others? And so we're going to get started with Rose this time.
There we go. I want to be able to do that, like get my face in and out. I like that. Every
Zoom,
time
it always,
I didn't know how that used to happen. It happens in meetings, and I'm
yeah.
like, oh, is he pulling the camera closer? Like, I don't know what he's doing.
Yeah.
Sorry. Humor is part of my existence as well. I hope it comes off that way and not silliness, but and I have to keep taking on and off my glasses. That's part of the aging piece. So yeah, the world is very complex, no question. I agree with that. And I agree that we are feeling the weight of that, even as someone who is no longer practicing, being involved in this committee, knowing social workers, knowing my future daughter-in-law is a social worker. So those kinds of connections still, inform me. But and there are so many competing issues and so many folks who are marginalized, and there's so much injustice in the world. My question always is, how do we trust the work we're doing will bring about the change we need? Because certainly, when I started in 1985, and I remember, I just remembered recently that I did graduate first in 1985 when Dalhousie sent me a invite to a little brunch because I was a special year graduating, and I'm like, what? Oh, it's 40 years. Great. So that's it's been a while. It's been a minute. But there's so much. I mean, I guess for me is I was one of these social workers, like, oh, just go back in the 80s that stated emphatically that I didn't see color of people's skin. And that made me not racist. And little did I know, and little did I understand. But then when I completed my MSW, 25 years ago, I did a lot of unlearning, and more than I realized was even possible. Um, there's been so much growth and so much shifting in the pendulum of complexities and intersectionality of oppression, and how that has changed and morphed, and all of that has come to light like no other time, I believe. Because when I reflect and look back on how we were doing things 40 years ago, or even 30 years ago, or even 25 years ago, that's all changed. Not that it's completely thrown out, but that there have been so many nuances and evolution of how people are talking about issues, how people are recognizing issues. And I think that's an important feature for us to remember as social workers, that there will always be the constant change. So I feel like I just rambled on there without actually saying something. So building connections and activating hope, though, has not really changed in 40 years, which is an interesting thing, because I think that there's still some commonalities and still some things about looking at cultivating critical hope and how that really hasn't changed. So critically looking at those structures that you know, oppress folks, that bring everyone, folks with invisible disabilities, folks with very visible, you know, differences that make us acknowledge that. And I think it's something that social workers have always done. It's just being done in a more inclusive way. And I hate to use that word, as it sounds like I'm, you know, kind of shaking a what do you call it? A magic wand over something. That was something else. I mean, I think that when we graduate, we kind of all kind of believe that if you sprinkle a magic wand and fairy dust over something, you're going to be able to make a change. And if it was only that easy, I mean, that's, you know, part of the issues. So for me, the biggest piece has always been about relationships. And I'll go back to that word again and again and again. So critical hope to me is about relationships with our colleagues, with the folks we work with the established rule makers, with government. And, you know, certainly we can see some of those pieces in our current political structures and in our current election that just happened, right? There are going to have to be some serious relationships to move our country forward in a way that we're going to want. Whether we like who was elected or not, there still has to be a relationship. And the word entangled keeps coming up in my mind too, in terms of where we find the commonality. And I think that's where finding the commonality and finding the similarities is where we start going forward with some hope. And activating hope is, I think, for me, the act of making those relationships meaningful and authentic for people that we work with, but also for ourselves. And I firmly believe that when we graduate as social workers, we have the tools to go forward with hope. We understand advocacy. We understand pushing and pulling and navigating and screaming if we need to about injustice. But we also understand that those may not always be appropriate in all situations. So that's where the notion of, and I go back to, relationships and knowing when to pull and when to push, and knowing when to stand back and when to, you know, move forward. And I think it's important too that what I've learned is that we're never able to take it all on alone, and we're never able to address every issue. But I think that for me, in my career, being able to say, I worked on this, and in this circumstance, I made a difference. And it might be just linking back to, you know, one particular client or one moment where something positive came out of a situation. And just that, remembering just that one success, and I use that word, well, I use it generously, but success can help sort of brush away some of the feelings that we're not doing enough, some of the feelings that maybe I'm not good enough, maybe the work I need to do is different. And that's all good too, because that critical reflection is necessary. And I mean, I just think back to, there was a moment when, this is just an example that popped into my head, and I know I'm probably taking way too much time for this. But there's a moment that popped into my head that I had a client when I was working in community services years ago, back in the early 90s, who needed a vet bill paid. Some of you may have heard this example before. A vet bill paid because the animal was her seeing eye dog. And I was working special assistance, and she came to me, and there was no way that I could get this vet bill paid through any of our programs. Nothing in any of the legislation recognized that this would be a legit use of funds. And so I issued her money under medical travel, and because that I could get covered. And I remember getting called into the administrator's office, and I thought, okay, this is it. I'm either going to get something thrown at me, because this is the culture, something thrown at me, a file or whatever, or a big screaming match about why I did this. And I remember my supervisor's name was Bernie, and he said to me, he goes, what is this? It's a vet bill. Like, he's signing off on all these things. And I said, well, it was medical travel. This person could not go to any appointments without her dog with her. And he just looked at me and smiled and said, okay, take one for the win. And I walked out of there without being sort of, chastised. But I remember that. And that was like maybe like 1994. And I still remember that moment of feeling, yes, it was just pushing at the right time, taking a chance, but having that small win for that. It was everything to that client, everything that she could, pay that vet bill and still feel she could go forward in the world as herself, needing the animal with her. So I just, to me, I really would just like folks to think about those relationships, think about those entanglements, think about the times that you did make a difference. And then take care of yourself. That's sort of the last piece. And we've sort of heard that thread already this morning, of that, taking care of ourselves, and it really cannot be expressed enough. I know it seems a bit trite sometimes, oh, self-care, but no, it really is. And for me, this kind of activity is almost it is self-care, because again, I go back to, you are my people. You are the folks that we may look different, we may sound different, we have different ages, we have different skin color, we have a lot of things, but there's always this underlying, we're social workers, and that's our fabric, and that's how we're knit together. And I think that that's the entanglement. Those are the relationships that give me hope, which then allows me to go forward and activate hope in folks I work with. I'm going to stop.
Thanks, Rose. I just want to point to Carol's comment here. Great to see someone who can look back on a long career and stressful work with such hope and insight. Long live lifetime learners. And I just want to acknowledge as well from your comment, I can almost guarantee that every single social worker on this call right now has had to push the boundaries of policy and procedures at agencies that they worked at. I'm seeing nods from other panelists, and that to me is a piece of activating critical hope. So thank you for naming that. We are going to keep moving along. Hannah, you're next.
There we go. Sorry, I have like two screens here, and anyway, pressing the wrong one. So yeah, I want to just also further just socially locate myself. Tyler reminded me that, and hearing all of you wonderful panelists remind me of that as well. I work with what is now called Opportunities in Social Development. Don't come for me if I said that wrong. Formerly DCS. And I have worked there now for nearly 6 years, which upon graduation from BSW, probably I would have been the last person on earth you would expect to have worked in that agency. But this idea of critical hope really has me reflecting on the necessity to sometimes be in agencies and environments where it feels bleak and it feels maybe misaligned with where you hope they ought to be, in an effort to try to sustain some momentum and sustain hopeful, positive work, right? Because we can't fully remove ourselves from what we don't like, right? We need to engage in that. And so to socially locate that, I do work for them. I've worked within adoption and fostering and assessment roles and training roles for about 4 years now. And prior to that, I did a bit of child protection. And I'm from a rural community here in Nova Scotia. So Guysborough, shout out to Guysborough if anybody else here knows where that even is. So to the theme of this year's or this season's mini conference, to me, really the theme couldn't be more timely or more necessary, because we're in a world that feels just increasingly fragmented, politically, socially, emotionally. And so building connections just reminds us that healing and justice and progress all really begin in relationship, right? And as social workers, we know that connection's not just a soft skill, it's really a radical act in a lot of areas. And it's how we affirm just the dignity of others and challenge isolation and foster belonging that's just so important. And so activating critical hope to me is more than just encouraging people to stay positive, because that's very frustrating to hear on the other receiving end of that. But it's more about inspiring belief in the possibility of change, while also acknowledging the very, very real barriers that exist, right? And I think about that particularly as a worker from an agency that is, pardon the sirens, that is flawed, very flawed, right? And acknowledging that is part of the work, as somebody who works within a larger agency, because without that acknowledgement, everything really does feel very, artificial in a lot of ways. And so, being honest about the systems that harm while still committing to the transformation there. And I think that kind of hope isn't just passive, it demands some action and reflection and solidarity, right? It's not enough to just acknowledge it, but to also act on those flaws, right? And to push those barriers and to sort of challenge. And so that lends into that next question about what the role is for social workers. I feel that social workers are uniquely positioned to serve as sort of, I don't know, bridge builders between individuals and systems, or, in other contexts, maybe between despair and resilience and what could be and what is. And, our work is rooted in that belief that people are experts in their own lives. And so it's our role, I think, to help amplify those voices and connect folks with tools and communities, and to support their own power, right? To support what it is that they know they have and they bring it within themselves. And so activating critical hope, I think we really need to be disruptors, right? And that means challenging oppressive systems. It means calling out inequalities and not shying away from hard truths, which I don't do perfectly every day by any means, but it is something that I really tried to hang on to, especially working in a larger agency that has a lot of power over others. And so I think that, not shying away from those hard truths, but also means helping people envision what's sort of possible and cultivating, imagination, as Rose sort of said, thinking outside of the box of what's sort of presented to you as options, and in solidarity in face of adversity. and not by providing all the answers, but just by walking with people as they find their own paths forward, and just, you know, ultimately being both deeply practical and profoundly human, because while we are a profession, we are also humans that are working with other humans who can see each other's humanity, right? And to share in that.
Thanks so much, Hannah. Aisha, we're going to pass it over to you.
Thank you. I feel like I should just say ditto and move along because what everyone has been saying has been just so amazing. And I just want to say, like, I really appreciate the authenticity and like humanness people, all the panelists and everyone else is kind of showing up with. My neurospicy brain like kind of jumps places, and so I have like a script ready that I'm like, okay, this is super scripted. I'm going to stick to this. And then as people are speaking, I'm like, oh my God, yes. Oh my God, yes. So just bear with me as I kind of go through my scripted response. And hopefully my brain will kind of shut off so I can do that and then maybe add some more to it. But yeah, just acknowledging that my brain, there's a little birdie that like jumps from thought to thought. So yeah, just bear with me, folks. So just kind of to answer the first question, I believe Bria kind of mentioned this earlier where she was saying like, oh my God, yeah, I haven't really thought of this. Like, what does critical hope kind of mean to me? And I had the same reaction. So I was quite like struck with how in the past few months, with like what's going on globally and even in like our own province, I've been kind of like working on autopilot. But then when I like kind of sat down and reflected, I realized how much of my energy in the work I have done has been sustained by hope, but not like just personal hope, like hope and belief by my family, friends, and colleagues, and the clients that I work with, and how their hope kind of fuels me. So with that being said, I think there is a deep like personal meaning of overcoming adversities in my personal life, but also like a secondary meaning in which the theme of like conversations here today remind me that as social workers, we cannot work in silos, and our best work is done collectively. So I feel like the theme kind of helps me reignite some of the drive that I lost feeling crushed by the systems I and like we interact with every day as service providers. So as social workers, we all know we're like guided by values and ethics, and we do have the privilege of being positioned in a way where we hold space for our clients and also use our power and privilege to like challenge systems of oppression. So we not only like witness the harms of society and systems, but we are also advocates, challengers, and activators of hope. By nature of our profession, we push for change by building momentum, not by using false hope, but by using our advocacy and empathy to drive for a more equitable future, which I and we know is possible, which is why we do this work every day and why we show up. For me, I feel like I know hope is like a disruptive practice in a system that makes failure feel like a personal issue. And I really wanted to highlight that because I think it's our duty as social workers and my duty as a social worker to contextualize my clients' challenges and suffering as a byproduct of the system that they interact with, and then find unique and like innovative solutions for that. So I think, as Hannah mentioned, and folks also mentioned, that as social workers, it's kind of our job and to show up for our clients and to carry that hope when maybe others can't. Thank you for bearing with me as I really like rush through this. Yeah, I think that's it for me now, Tyler.
Actually, you're killing it as always. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Kendall, we're gonna head it over to you.
Okay. I also wanted to mention in my opening that I did not mention that I'm also neurodivergent. I also have PTSD, autism, and ADHD. So, you know, the triple threat. Also, I'm very grateful to be in space with Aisha and also Bria, who I both did my BSW with. So it's really special to see us all like in this place now. It makes my heart very warm. But yeah, talking about like this year's theme, I think that like in recent talking with community members, like everything that's coming up is like, oh, I've been doom scrolling, and I've literally had to like come up with ways of like how I respond to like, okay, well, if you're doom scrolling, it's like also how much of that are you doing? Like, is it actually going to help you to spiral on this, or like, do you have all the information you have about the situation, and like continuing down that rabbit hole is just going to be harmful? It's almost self-harm in a way, where it's like you're going into And then you're just kind of building up the existential dread, which like I was gonna mention, as Howie said, I've also had existential dread since I was very much, small child on the playground. But I think like talking about like building connections, like I also have like I also have like little notes that I'm trying to go off of, but also like want to respond to things that other panelists have said. But talking about how like relationships are very much, and like this idea of building connections is the core of like Indigenous social work, especially where like there is kind of a mutual mistrust when it comes to Indigenous folks and also like other marginalized communities interacting with especially like health systems and mental health systems, because these systems have been carceral and have been harmful in the past. And like that's how people interact with these systems that destroy families and do all these things that they have been built to do, because that is, they are working as designed. The systems are working as designed. And like that's something that we really need to accept in our work, is that like we are moving against, because even the thought of like having anti-oppressive practice implies that the practice itself is oppressive, and like that, like we came up with anti-oppressive practice to kind of like circumvent the harm that was being done. So like talking about like how trust and mutual trust and respect and like building the therapeutic alliance is so important to like how I interact with clients, and like how I come from like using a lot of humility in those relationships, and like kind of taking a step back from like that go-to expert stance, and like also acknowledging like the wisdom that like the people I work with have, and like what they have to contribute, and like also being someone who like has a lot of similar intersectional identities with the people I work with, like knowing that like if I could have absolutely been in this position if I didn't have the supports in my life, or like if things had worked out differently for me. So like having that amount of empathy, like mutual care and respect, and also I think focusing on like strengths and resilience, and also like where oftentimes like especially in Indigenous communities, like all of the statistics are like this is the high suicide rate, this is the high substance abuse rate, and like not focusing on positives, or like spreading. Actually did just do a workshop on lateral kindness, so talking about how like the use of lateral kindness is like decolonial, and like actually how we can change spaces to combat lateral violence, and talking about focusing on strengths and resilience, and like how ancestors and people before us have gotten to this point because they were resilient and strong, and like that we have inherited that strength as well. And also, as Rose was talking, I was thinking about something. I didn't quite have to bend the rules for this, because I literally just like asked my manager, and she's very cool. I love her. She is my emotional support white lady. She's the one I send in to kind of like yell at the other white people, because sometimes I can't do it without being like taken as more, confrontational. But she allowed me to pay for gender affirming care for one of my clients. It was hair removal, so it's not covered by Nova Scotia health insurance or non-insured health benefits. So I ended up paying for like facial hair removal for one of the trans femmes I work with. And like I have actually noticed like quite the change and shift in like her mental health overall. Like she's trying to get into like skincare and makeup now, which is like really huge. And like it's just so special to see like the actual result of like how providing that for someone is going to change like how they actively look at their life, and like move towards like more life promoting ways of being. And I think like talking about like remembering like the critical and critical hope, and how it's about naming the bigger issues and these systemic issues that are oftentimes individualized and internalized as being like our fault, when really like that's how the system is not built for us. Especially like as Indigenous people, like a lot of the systems were built to either intentionally eliminate us or intentionally exclude us, which is inherently a traumatic thing to live through. So moving away from like that individuality, and like moving towards like more valuing of community care, and like lifting everyone up, and focusing in on like the Mi'kmaq teachings of love and truth, respect, humility, patience, and wisdom. I don't know if I missed one there, but it's actually like embodying those and striving to embody those in like not only just our one-on-one practice, but also in our policies and procedures, and making sure that like we are decolonizing where we can, but understanding that like decolonization isn't enough. And a lot of times, like, not everything can be decolonized. Some of that shit's got to go. And essentially just like saying that like the foundation of what we do is like care work. It's about like taking care of others, and that also means taking care of ourselves. And like, while self-care has kind of been very commercialized and like capitalized, like talking about like the actual roots of self-care and like radical self-care, and how taking care of yourself was a radical act. And I feel like a lot of people who talk about that like don't actually know why taking care of yourself was a radical act, or why like resting and like in a capitalistic white supremacist world is a radical act, and talking about how like housing and how food insecurity and how all of these structural issues are often the core of a lot of these like mental health problems that we see, like because they are oftentimes just byproducts of these systems that are not built to do those. And I think like spreading like lateral kindness and also like creating hope and cultivating hope in these spaces is so needed in this current time, these unprecedented times. It's like I miss precedented times, but you know, we cannot go back. But like talking about how like we need to have those relationships as the core, and like that no one heals in isolation, like we're it's about interdependence, it's about co-regulation for like all of these folks who are experiencing and living under a traumatic system. So like building connections is crucial for us to heal and grow and learn, but also understanding that like it's not only us that are teaching the people we're working with, like we're also learning from the people we work with and like those with lived and living experience. And I think that's about all I wanted to say. I'll let someone else.
Thanks, Kendall. I just want to note that there was lots of reactions for the content that you were sharing, your perspectives, and I just want to point to Jackie Barkley's comment in the chat box as well. This is the importance of critical along with the hope, and you referenced this as well, Kendall, and everyone's speaking to this idea that there's also a risk of being critical, and some people face that risk more disproportionately based on their identities and their communities and the oppression they face. And so, again, as we see the rise of fascism and authoritarianism, there's a squeeze on how critical people can be. There's we just have to look to the federal election to see the anti-woke sort of sentiments and how that can be percolating down into our agencies. So, Kendall, thank you for naming so much of that. I really appreciate it. Colin, if you could just round us out for this round of questions, please.
Absolutely. And I want to say that seeing Kendall here kind of warms my heart. Kendall was in a class I taught about 3 years ago, and they were a superstar then, so I'm not surprised that they're out there doing all the terrific things in the world, for sure. And so when I thought about this question, I thought building connection really is where all sort of meaningful work begins. And I think that, like Kendall just said, like healing doesn't happen in isolation. Advocacy and change, they don't happen in isolation. They all happen in relationship and like working in a relational way. And I think advocating and activating hope really means choosing to act even when things feel heavy. And it's never like blind optimism. I think it's the courage to imagine that things can be different while still staying honest to, what those injustices are. And I think we're not just, we talk about being helpers and helping people, but really we're helping to navigate broken systems, these broken systems that we, work in and exist in. And I think we're always kind of reimagining what could be. And when I worked in emergency mental health, I would often get kind of called in by colleagues to kind of help with clients who had kind of shut down. So they would say to me, can you go in and kind of work your magic in a way? But what I did wasn't magical. It was about really kind of working relationally with people, building connection, giving a sense of safety and trust. And just for an example, there was one day, there was a young lady who was there, had a horrendous history, horrendous trauma, was couch surfing, dealing with homelessness, some problematic substance use, so had been in to see us fairly frequently, sometimes brought by police, so not always willingly. But she'd been there for hours, like completely shut down. And So yeah, a colleague had come, said, could you go and just give it a try and try to chat with her. So I went in and I noticed right away she was wearing this like really bright pink hoodie. And as luck would have it, I had on a pink polo myself. And it was right around the time that the Barbie movie was out and was really popular. So I kind of walked in the room, I tugged on my shirt and said, hey, Barbie much? And like she cracked a smile. First time, we saw her face in hours. And then we were able to sort of, laugh and joke a little bit about the movie, and eventually kind of gave me, a way in. So it sort of like cracked that door. And again, like nothing magical. It was just something that, made connection possible in that way. And so when I think about hope, sometimes it means just, using humor in that way, taking a breath when we need it, naming what's not working, and really kind of refusing to give in sort of despite that. And I think critical hope doesn't make the work easier. It just makes what we do more possible.
Mhm. Thank you so much, Colin. And I'm going to think of that line, Barbie much? Throughout the day. Want to reflect back a little bit what I've heard in the conversations that we've had in these questions, that one of the themes, the big primary one I'm hearing from all of you is the importance of being relational and centering in relationship. But I think, Hannah, as you said, that healing, justice, and progress all begin in relationships. And that's what all of you have spoken to over and over again. The best work is done collectively, this idea of community care. Um, Also, the social work can be radical, but also the systems are working as designed. And so there can be a paradox within trying to apply a social justice lens, a decolonial lens, an anti-colonial lens, while also working in colonial systems. Um, Also, the change is constant. And so as social workers, whether our career has been 40 years or whether our career has just been a couple of years, things change and we have to be fluid and emergent and adaptive with the context of now. And then also one of the things I was hearing a lot about in the responses today was that really reminding this thing called the tragic gap. And I'm speaking to the reference of Parker Palmer, where it's this, we're in between the what is and what is possible. And I think one of you referenced this concept as well. And so our job as social workers to help ourselves and others in the community to move towards what is possible while also recognizing what is now. Great job, everyone. Thank you so much. We are going to move on to question 3. And we're almost at time, but we'll go a little into the break. And a reminder to folks that, we did build some spaciousness into this, and then the lunchtime session is meant to be really informal. So join if you can, and if you can't, that's also okay. But take care of yourself. Question 3. Really to summarize and bring together some of these ideas, let's point to the future. So what is your vision for a more just and harmonious world? How do we make it a reality? And anything else you'd like to share that you feel is important to share before we wrap up our panel discussion. And Kendall, we're going to get started with you.
All right. So I think like in all these conversations, it's really nice that like people have these thoughts already and like are already doing the work. Because especially like that's really grateful to see that actually happening, because like you always kind of hear about like the bad things going on all the time. So it's like actually knowing that there are people who are using humor and doing like things that might not be seen as like professional or like exactly up to like this perfect idea of what social work is, and like not understanding that like social workers are so expansive and so broad, and that there are many ways to be social workers. And like I think mostly it comes down to like that vision of like just treating everyone with like compassion and humanity and gentleness, and knowing that like even the most like traumatized people like sometimes just need that like that friendly, like someone reaching out, and someone like I've had people who have come in and it's just kind of like we just need to sit. And oftentimes like I start all my sessions with like by doing a smudge with people, and like a lot of times too it's like people's first time even using or having that opportunity to use traditional medicines and actually do that. And I very much appreciate that we work in a building where smudging is allowed in all rooms, because I know that that is something that comes up in hospitals and other places where like smudging is not allowed. But yeah, like using humor and also like just connecting with people on a human level, and understanding that like cultivating hope is our job. It should be the focus of everything we do. And that like that unconditional positive regard needs to be not like, it needs to actually be for our clients and actually be especially like for our most vulnerable. So like those who are unhoused, those who are using substances, like, and making sure that we have like harm reduction, like so that we have people who are using as safely as possible, because a lot of these issues, like the political stances to kind of like sweep them under the rug, move the encampments again, do all these things so it's out of view. But like really, it's not actually treating the main reasoning behind that. Like it's not actually like building more houses or putting more money into mental health care or creating more transitional houses with less strict policies. Because like I know someone who was talking to me about like, yeah, like I never wanted to be in a shelter because it's regulated, it's rules, and like it's dehumanizing to have to do that. And it's really about cultivating the fact that like land, housing, food, and rest is really like the foundation of mental wellness. And like I want to say Maslow, but I know that Maslow stole it from the Blackfoot people. So I'm gonna say that like the Blackfoot like hierarchy of needs, like there was something there where it was like these are the foundational things that need to be addressed before we overall work towards further healing, but also how like little things build up into like intergenerational healing. Like I was speaking with a coworker yesterday about how she had asked the client, she was like, well, do you think that your mother was like more abusive than like this? Like she's like, yeah, like I'm definitely less abusive than my mother was. And like my colleague was just telling her, it's like, yeah, well, that's part of the intergenerational healing, that like you are doing the best you can and also striving to make better and different choices so that you can be there to support your kids in a way that maybe you weren't supported. And talking about like how we need to be advocating for changes in all of these spaces, but also making sure that allies and people who aren't part of those marginalized identities are speaking out just as loudly as those who are part of marginalized identities. And actually, I have something that I will quote. It's like a acronym for ally. Knowledge keeper Paulina Meter came up with, but it's like A is for advocate for community members and culturally responsive care. L for listen and learn, ask and be respectful of differing beliefs. The other L is leverage your privilege, commit to anti-racist, anti-oppressive practice that is self-reflective and adaptive. And the Y is yield the floor, allow community members to lead the conversations and speak on their own lived experiences. So that understanding that like the community member is always the expert in their own lives, and that like we are actually not the expert in the position in that role, and that we're really meant to walk alongside people in their healing journey and not force them down the path, because as we all know, like that's not helpful and it doesn't work, because like when people are not ready to do something, they will not do it. So like a lot of the really important work that I've done, like I've been working with people for almost like my whole time I've been in the mental health team. So I've been working with people 2 years, and like just now I'm starting to really get into like the real deep trauma work, because like these people have so much mistrust of the world around them. And like other mental health professionals, like we had to build up that rapport for that long to actually be able to dive deep and do that important work kind of thing. So like actually understanding that like the mental health system isn't usually reflective of how much time and how many sessions are actually needed to actually build a proper relationship and a foundation of that relationship. And a lot of our systems are not built to sustain that. So I am really grateful that like I have the opportunity where I can offer not only like free services to urban Indigenous folks, but also I don't move anyone off my caseload. And also my caseload is pretty fluid. Like people come and go. And like sometimes like if, especially like in the summer, I have unhoused folks who I see like all winter. And then the summer they're like, oh, I'm roughing it and I'm camping. So I'll see you in September, essentially. And like that's fine. People are allowed to focus on whatever they need to focus on this moment. And I also appreciate that in my role, I am able to at least not only collaborate with like other programs in the Friendship Center with like have more of a circle of care and like a collective care system that we can all kind of come together to get ideas and like think outside the box and create those creative ideas of how we're gonna kind of, I don't want to like skirt the policies, but you know, sometimes. And also just talking about how like even in the darkest day, like there was a quote recently that was going around about like from Dan Savage talking about how like in the darkest days of the AIDS crisis, like we buried our friends in the morning, we protested during the day, and then we went dancing in the night because the dance is what they were fighting for. And I think that's something that's so important. And like as we're cultivating joy and hope, like knowing that we are fighting for getting back to that joyful experience, like, and having pride and in our identities and in our intersectional identities and doing healing and resilience work. And like, yeah, cultivating that hope every day and focusing on like the positive ways that we are contributing daily, even if it seems small scale, like the ripples that it has on the broader community. And yeah, I think that's all for me.
Thank you, Kendall. It's a beautiful vision. I mean, there's a question in the chat as well. If you're able to put the allies acronym in the chat, that'd be really lovely. I think a few of us were, I was like, I'm gonna write it down. I was like, I can't write it down that fast. So please put it in the chat if you can. Oh, I see you doing it. Thank you. Colin, what's your vision for a more just and harmonious world, and how are we gonna get there?
Yeah, well, through my research and the research that I hope to do, I focus a lot on sort of what I call toxic or harmful masculinity. And I think when I think of a world that's more just and harmonious, I think it's dealing with that. I think it is intervening early, kind of recognizing signs when men and boys are withdrawn or disillusioned, and how we can just build more inclusive ways of being masculine and more positive ways of being masculine. Which I think, or my hope is to help kind of build care models around that are sort of trauma informed, gender expansive, queer affirming, and rooted in justice and compassion. And I think a world where boys and men who have experienced trauma can express emotion and softness without shame, who can heal, particularly so they don't go on to harm others, and where masculinity is relational, not rigid, so human and not harmful. I think about a world where queer youth are celebrated and feel safe, not just tolerated. And I think as social workers, we don't always have to have the answers. Like Kendall just said, we look to our clients as the experts, and we need to be able to kind of walk alongside them, and we need to do that with curiosity, courage, and connection. And I think critical hope isn't just like erasing the barriers, but I think it just gives us strength to keep kind of moving through them. And I think sometimes that can look like, using dark humor, having snacks, or taking a dance break in the middle of the afternoon. But yeah, that's my hope for the future.
Dance break in the middle of the afternoon. I'm gonna revise this conference schedule. All right, everyone, 2:30 dance break. Well, actually not actually, but next time. I'm holding on to that. We're gonna move on to who do we have next on the list. Oh, Aisha, what's your vision and how are we gonna get there?
So just gonna start again with the preface of my neurospicy brain and wanting to like speak from my script, but also like to kind of layer on more to what the other panelists said. Again with the ditto piece, but also yeah, just wanted to speak to. I like Kendall said, they mentioned that sometimes it's not just like decolonial practices that need to happen. It's sometimes we need to get rid of the systems altogether. So keeping that in mind as well. And acknowledging that there needs to be like a redistribution of power, and having like decolonial practices as the center of this redistribution. More of a focus on like supporting each other and less of a focus on policing and arbitrary borders. Now this will require like daily practices of decolonization, and of course like highlighting marginalized voices such as disability justice and Black liberation advocates. Acknowledging and understanding that to have a better future, we need to work from a collective lens and not an individualistic lens like we have for decades and centuries. I wrote a couple notes here as people were talking and just mentioning like curiosity as a tool for a better future, as it helps us like approach different experiences with openness, and like allows us to have a flexibility of mind. I also wrote down creativity, because creativity can allow us to see a different future, and working with like-minded people and as Kendall mentioned, allies. I wrote like maintaining hope while also remaining critical of systems is important. So although it's really important that we're being hopeful and can see that change is possible, we need to still remain critical because these systems do kind of function on the fact that people are tired, people are overburdened, burnt out, and the system kind of really uses that and feels works on that. So acknowledging that we need to create space for people's healing. And I did kind of just want to mention kind of what brought me to doing social work and being a part of this panel was kind of like my own lived experience, like Kendall and Bria mentioned, and I'm sure other folks have also felt throughout their education pieces, not having like my lived reality and my experience and people that look like me reflected in the education system. My first job was actually child welfare after I graduated. And I think a bit of like hope and naivety was kind of involved in that, and hoping that folks that look like myself that were involved with the system would have better supports and care. And I think one thing that really kind of keeps the hope alive in me is having worked with several Muslim families while I was working in child welfare and having kids ask me like, oh, you're Muslim. Like, how did you get to where you're at? And like, oh, I never thought I'd see someone who looks like you. And having kids like wanting to take extra, like a couple of minutes to sit with me and just ask me questions about how I'm showing up really kind of spoke to me and helped me realize like this is why I'm in this work. So even when I am kind of feeling down and I'm like, okay, I don't think I can do this, I am really like reflecting on that piece and that one child out of several that kind of asked me and took the time to be like, hey, is it okay if we could just kind of sit and connect? And the child kind of shared their experience of being bullied for being Muslim in the school. Because there is still that narrative of Muslim people being violent, and that narrative worldwide that we are only here to cause harm. So I kind of want to speak to that. So if there's other people here and people that are working with folks that look like me, that there is hope and there are people who are doing the work. I know a few other Muslim social workers who are really dedicated to this and other BIPOC social workers. Um, yeah, so I guess kind of just, I guess that's what kind of helps me maintain hope. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Did a great job of blending the script, but also speaking from the heart. Not that you need my validation. We're going to move over to, I believe, Rose, you're next.
There we go. You're probably going to hear a dog barking too. I don't know, it's in my ears, but he's outside. So, okay. My vision for a more just and harmonious world. Holy cow. Big question. I think I go to something Jackie Barkley put in the comments around where we are in history today. I think we have to understand that history. We have to understand that in 2025, we are closer to 1935 than we ever thought we'd be. The build up to World War II, the the genocide that happened then, we're seeing it again today. So I know that's not the happy, just, harmonious world that we're asking about, but I think that that's a big piece of how do we get there is not forgetting the historical pieces. Not forgetting about residential schools, not forgetting about fascism. Will it be challenging? Yes. Will it ever go away? I don't think so. I think that there will always be something that comes up that social workers will need to address. We have to be resistant. We have to continuously seek justice, continuously seek advocacy. We need to say something. Don't be silent. I feel like I'm giving you a bunch of memes that might come up on your Facebook page. Believing in yourself. I mean, I think that's a huge piece of what the vision for the future will be. And remembering that one client, that one moment makes a huge difference. It's a ripple, right? And it can, the pebble in the pond, it can ripple out and make changes. How do we make it a reality? I'm not sure. I really don't know. because 40 years ago, I would never have believed I would be sitting here talking about some of the same things that I'm talking about. And I never would have thought that I would be talking about, as somebody who grew up in a military family in Cold War Europe in the 60s and 70s, I never believed in my wildest dreams that we would be talking about World War II and fascism the way we are today, based on what we're seeing from, the alt-right. So, we don't know what the future holds. But I think for me, I have to believe in those who follow behind, because I'm on my way. My door is closing, and I believe in the people that are coming behind me. And that's really important to me. And I think in seeking out other social workers and those relationships, I go back to that. That's a vision for a just world. When I graduated with my master's, my son was like 2.5, 3 years old. He's now 26. And I remember at the time saying to somebody in class, I always hoped that my white, cisgendered, privileged kid, because that's who he was going to grow up to be, there was no question, given who his parents were, that he would be able to have, be able to reflect differently, that I could give him something different than what I was able to understand growing up. And I wanted to be able to say to him, if you ever need a therapist, it shouldn't matter that they're not cisgendered and white, because he would have seen that. That was already reflected. He could already see that in himself, that it wouldn't matter that the person he saw was from a different community, or a different population of folks, or wore hijab, or I wanted him to be able to go to see a therapist or a mental health practitioner, and build a relationship with another human being. And I know that sounds a bit Pollyannish, but I still believe that. I still believe that there's a commonality, and that there's a connectedness between humans that's important. And so I think my final piece is the way we, move to our harmonious world is to continue to rock the boat. I have that on a poster. It was in my office, and I used to bring it to class when I was teaching at the school. That was sort of one of my last days. It would be, that's your gift to the world. Rock the boat. And I think that's the only way I can sort of close, as somebody who's almost at the end of, well, I am at the end of my career. I'm really not planning on doing a whole lot more work. I'm trying to enjoy my life a little bit, and trying to, sort of reap the benefits of that hard work. Sometimes that's tough, based on, health and all those other things. But yeah, rock the boat. That's all I can say.
Make me think of the old Aaliyah song, Rock the Boat, but also the importance of unsettling social work and continue to disrupt. Thank you so much, Rose. Hannah,
welcome.
if you could round us out on this final question. What's your vision? How do we get there?
Yes. Look, everything that everybody said is like on my list, more or less. So I'm not going to reiterate any of that. But what has been on my mind, I'm doing my placement in a private therapy clinic. And so learning a lot about and practicing with folks acceptance and commitment therapy. So a lot of that is the work of self-compassion, or really I like to think about even collective compassion practices. And I'm just thinking about this in terms of what's required for a just and harmonious world. All of those disruptive pieces are, and two, actually, if I think about it, self-compassion is quite disruptive, because we're not in a society that really values self-compassion. It's more of like work harder, do better, these sorts of values, right? And so I think that if folks could my God, my voice sounds bad. I think that if folks could adopt that practice really worldwide, where we're gentler with ourselves and less critical and more curious about our perceived, failings and challenges and differences that we think of ourselves, then we just inherently extend that same curiosity and compassion to others. And I see that in real time when I'm working with others and clients through self-compassion. When we think about ourselves more gently and kindly, we inherently start thinking about other people and other situations the same way. And so I think that my idea of a more harmonious world is one with less judgment, less, if not no gatekeeping, right? Less desire to label and condemn, and more just capacity to be kindly curious and compassionate towards ourselves and others. And so, critical hope, if we think about that as hope in action, and self and collective compassion is that sort of emotional grounding for that action, just together, that can support our anti-oppressive practices and enable social workers to face, harsh realities without also falling just into despair and cynicism, because that's pretty easy to do in this work sometimes, right? And being reminding ourselves with that compassionate lens is that action, just as Bria had said in the beginning, is measured in so many different ways, right? And Aisha and all of you, everybody has given suggestions of how that action can be done, and not being boggled down by not, quote unquote, doing enough. Because there's so many ways that our acts have such impact, just by way of us all being here sharing our thoughts and interpretations of that. Being self-reflective, having a critical lens and bringing forward that knowledge as social workers in our personal and professional lives, because, look no further than the internet. Not everybody thinks the same way that we all might, or share the same values, right? And so just by being who you are in the world and bringing forward your generousness and your curiosity and your compassion, I think is a way that we get there, right? And if we could all be a little bit kinder and better to each other, my God, what a world it could be, right? That sounds kumbaya, but it is. That's I believe a big step forward. So that's all I'll say.
Hannah, wonderful job of tying the bow on that question. Thank you for that. We're going to move into a break here in a second, but I just want to reflect back some of what I've heard around this question, the importance of continuing to rock the boat. And so for me, I hear that as unsettling social work and making sure that we're disrupting it as we move forward. Making sure that we're not forgetting, so practicing the unforgetting of historical harms and the present day connections to those historical harms. Making sure that the future is decolonized, and to get there, it's not just enough to decolonize, but also be anti-colonial. So not just trying to assimilate into the dominant systems, but actually tearing them down. Supporting, not policing, the removal of borders, not just land borders, but borders and identity borders, and how we approach things, binary thinking, compassion in the self and the collective, gentleness, humanity, relational, resisting domination and dehumanization. And then I think it was Kendall who shared this, but land, food, housing, and rest are central and accessible. Joy is a foundation in the future that we're hopefully working towards, and that ultimately the people are celebrated and safe, not just for how they're the same, but also for how they're different. So thank you so much to the panelists for sharing so much of your insights and wisdoms in this conversation. I just want to point to Kendall's comment here that there's going to be a No More Stolen Sisters Memorial March happening this Monday, May 5th. So if you're available, do go to the Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center at noon in Chipuktuk on Brunswick Street. They're also happening around Nova Scotia, so please check in with local Indigenous communities and people who are doing this work wherever you are, and see if there's another No More Stolen Sisters Memorial March for you as well. So thank you to Rose and Aisha, Colin, Kendall, and Hannah for being on the panel discussion today. Some of us met for the first time today, and it was really lovely to be able to connect, and some of you have known a little bit longer, but all of you have shared really insightful information. So I've been seeing a lot of reactions and comments in the chat that really uplift the insights and wisdom that you've shared. Please also join me in celebrating and recognizing these folks in the chat as well. They've done such a fabulous job, and thank you again.